I'm trying to shift their thinking and allow them to think like, no, this is not about this. You have ADHD or you have executive function delays. This is part of what you have to struggle with. It's not something you necessarily have to feel bad about. Well, it is something that like you're going to have to, battle, but you can develop these skills and overcome this.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Ponderbox Stay Curious podcast. Today I'm super excited to welcome Chris Fugelsang, Director of the Exceptional Path, a company that provides executive function coaching for students with ADHD, other learning disabilities, and or executive function delays. Chris helps students achieve academic success by addressing the root cause behind their struggles at school. He works with students who lack skills in planning, prioritizing, time management, self-awareness, working memory, attention, flexibility, self-control, study skills, and task initiation. So a whole range of areas that they need support with. Through Chris's coaching company, which we'll learn more about today in this episode, Chris provides accountability, structure, and consistency for his clients. His one-to-one coaching identifies the student's areas of weakness and creates an individualized and customized plan to develop the skills, techniques, methods, and routines necessary to find success in school and life. You can learn more about Chris and what he does via the link in bio. And in today's episode, we're going to dig right in, and I've got lots of questions to ask you, and I'm really excited to have you. So thank you for joining me today, Chris.
Thanks so much, Natalie, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You're welcome. So first of all, I'd like to ask, before you got into EF coaching, what was your life like before you progressed to this stage where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I was in education for about 16 years as a special education teacher. I've taught in private, international, public schools in New York City, and had just kind of always worked with kids who are neurodiverse and kind of struggling to fit in or find a space academically, or oftentimes I would have, small groups of students in what we would call like either a learning support classroom or a resource room, which they were pulled out of their class. And would have like 4 or 5, 6, sometimes students in the class. And I would just be kind of bouncing around, helping them with their assignments. And I realized that like, there's got to be a better way, like not just putting out these little fires, but I've got to find a different way to kind of help all these people, all these students in my class. And that's kind of where I kind of fell into this idea of like executive functioning and understanding ADHD and learning how to help students who are struggling. They're usually intellectually average or above average, and just what I was trying to answer this question: what are they all struggling with? What can help them move to the next level, and how can they find success? Because I know they have what it takes. They just lack these other peripheral skills around learning and around school that they struggled with. So, and then that kind of led me. I was doing that in all different types of settings throughout my career, and then that kind of led me up to where I am now, which is full-on coaching, because I've seen that the need is so great for this one-on-one type of support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of talk at the moment around ADHD, and it's something that's quite close to my heart, and I want to understand more about it. I'm undiagnosed, but I'm 99.9% sure that I have ADHD. And we can go into that a little bit. I'll share with you some insight on why I believe that's true. But I'm also cautious about saying that because I feel like everybody at the moment, especially in the UK, is self-diagnosing themselves as they believe they have ADHD. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. If that is it like an epidemic that you see in the US? Are people, more and more people getting diagnosed? And do you feel like that's because it is an epidemic, or do you think there's like a misdiagnosis issue as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the past we just didn't notice. We didn't know what ADHD was, and people didn't know how to define it. And I think actually the pandemic and students learning from home really kind of pushed the numbers up, so to speak, in terms of people trying to get diagnosed or looking to get diagnosed, because there were a lot of students. I'm talking about young people right now, but adults as well, were home, and they didn't have certain structures and routines and people around them. So I think not only parents but people like yourself or like myself as well, seeing certain patterns and behaviors, and like finding it difficult to get started, procrastinating too much, all these things, and asking the right questions, like I think it's because for a time there, a lot of people would just say, oh, I if they were struggled with something, oh, I have ADHD. I think it's more than that, right? It's more than getting started and like having trouble, focusing and attention and all that. But I think there's more awareness around it, so I think more people are questioning and thinking, maybe I should get tested. Maybe I do. Maybe there is something more to this than just um, you know not not being able to get a few chores or tasks done. It's actually really affecting my life in multiple ways. So I think I need to do some more discovery and get some help in this area. So
Yeah, that makes total sense. Um, in your experience, having worked with so many students that have ADHD, what would you define as the telltale characteristics?
yeah, I like to. These aren't my ideas. These are like the people who study this field very in depth, and I kind of have done a lot of research on what it really is ADHD, and a lot of times there's even, like we say, like hyperactivity is a part of it, like focus and attention is a part of it, um, and we say attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? So like in some ways it's a little bit of a misnomer. Those are definitely symptoms for some people, but then you have an inattentive type of ADHD which doesn't have the hyperactivity per se. um,
Mm,
but I think one of the ways to describe it best is it's more of a performance issue than it is like a hyperactivity issue. Like most of the students I work with, they know what they need to do. They know how they need to do it. Even they know what it takes to do it, but they just can't perform. They can't act on it. So
yeah.
if we had to boil it down to one simple like phrase, I would say it's this performance issue of not being able to follow through on the things you know and want to do to be.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I spent my life wondering why I would hyperfixate on projects, and there would be a multitude of projects throughout my life that I would hyperfixate on. And then after they call it like chasing the dopamine, right? After I got that hit of dopamine, I would then leave that project and never touch it again. And I
right,
always wondered, like, I always felt like it was something that was wrong with me, because I would start these elaborate projects and I'd be really excited about them and I'd be super convinced that I could do what I was setting out to do. Much of the time, they're quite unrealistic projects as well. Um, an example is when I was younger. I remember we had a very old computer. It was a dial-up connection, so you know how slow those computers were.
mhm,
And I remember sitting there and I was absolutely fascinated with this idea of rescuing elephants from Africa, because I'd seen like a WWF advert with like the tusks, they were getting detusked. And I just had this like innate need to find out how to rescue the elephants from Africa and get them to the UK. And looking at that now, it sounds hilarious. It's quite bizarre, but this is kind of like the story of my life, starting lots of random projects and then being able to follow through to the point where they are actually complete and finished. Um, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't quite understand about ADHD, that you do have a lot of the times the skills and the knowledge to be able to actually do a whole range of things, but it's the performance aspect that is the struggle.
Absolutely. And then we might get this like motivation to start something out of nowhere. And a lot of times people with ADHD have lots of interests, and they want to do lots of different things, but this idea of starting projects and not finishing them is a common theme throughout a lot of the people that I work with.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What do you feel is the biggest struggle the students you've worked with, what is the biggest struggle they face that you have found a way to support them with?
Well, I like to think about it as the most fundamental skill that kind of can we can build off of is planning and organizing. And once having an idea, what it does is it helps with a lot of different skills, especially around executive functioning. So it helps with time management, it helps with focus and attention, it helps with planning and organizing. So putting everything into like a weekly calendar, and kind of separating them things into categories. So if I have school students, I have like scheduled events on the top, then I have like their homework in the middle section, and then I have other to-do items or other things that might be on their list as well on the bottom. And I lay it out for the next 2 weeks, and we just kind of brain dump everything into that document. If I can get my students to really start to use that, it really helps with mapping things out, helps with helping organize things in their brain, knowing when and where they're going to have to do something, taking larger tasks and breaking them down into smaller pieces. To me, that's the fundamental skill. I mean, there's many other skills that surround that we often tend to work on. But if we can lay things out there, then there's so many places we can go from there in terms of like, okay, here's where you're struggling, here's how you can tackle it. But it kind of is the foundational skill for a lot of my students to really you know master that before moving on to other skills.
Mm. You mentioned as well some of the skills you work on with students, or some of the ways that you support is by giving them accountability. That again is a very key thing that I very much understand. The idea of this body double as well. Like I'm also a certified teacher, and I, through teaching a lot of students that had ADHD, come to my understanding that, oh, hang on a minute, there's a lot of similarities here. Perhaps this is what's held me back throughout life and why I've struggled so much. And when I did my master's degree as well, what all the studying I've done as an adult, I found this accountability, giving myself accountability, but from an external source, has been very powerful. So, for example, going and studying at a library or a cafe and having to do my work there has been really key, because when you're around other people that are working, you've kind of got no choice but to do it. So is that something that you do as well in terms of accountabilities? Do you provide that in some way? You mentioned that you kind of did, but maybe
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
shed
for
more light on
sure.
how you do that.
Hmm. Yeah, so typically, what we'll have, like I do 2 sessions a week with my students. One is like a longer 45-minute session, and then it's followed up by like a 10 to 15-minute check-in accountability session. And that's where we're not waiting those 7 days where they're gonna forget about me, and we're gonna. So it's important for them to check in and to see, have I made progress? Because usually I'll assign action steps. So I'll give certain things. Okay, can you try to work on this week? But it's never, the accountability is never about like, instilling fear or shame or guilt around not completing the things. Like it's almost like, from my perspective as a coach, sometimes it's almost like I'm expecting them to not follow through, and like that's part of the process. So when that happens, it's all about, can we hit the reset button? Can we start over? Can we build this up from scratch? And what can we do differently next week to try to get you back on track? But as you mentioned, Natalie, like I think a lot of for a lot of people, body doubling is such a huge and tremendous support for people, because if they're around other people who are working, they almost do sometimes. Sometimes it's a matter of it's a little bit of a guilt feeling. Oh, everyone else is working, I should be too. But sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm in this environment where I can get stuff done, and
Mm.
it's conducive to learning, and this is where I should put myself. I don't have the distractions that I would if I was working at home in my bedroom with my bed right a few feet away,
Yeah.
right? There's accountability can come in a variety of ways. I think my version of accountability is we can hold ourselves accountable, but sometimes we even need somebody else to step in and give us that kind of support. So that's why the coaching is, in my opinion, really effective.
Yeah, I feel like it still as an adult, I need that. So I mean, you do tend to train your brain to take on certain skills, and these are skills that a lot of people that are not neurodivergent, they don't have that struggle. They're things that seemingly seem very obvious and easy to do. But yeah, it is really important, I think, to be accountable. What was the defining moment for you where you shifted from being a school teacher, being in the classroom, to now going into your coaching business?
Yeah, I think that it was during that time of the pandemic where everybody was learning from home and everyone was using Google Classroom and all these online platforms for learning, and I just saw the problem. The students who I know struggled in the classroom, I saw them like struggling on a whole nother level, like on these computers, trying to navigate, and like the technology that's supposed to be helping us improve is actually making things way worse. And I saw that, I had already started seeing some students like one on one, like through tutoring, and then transitioned over to coaching, and then the need was there, and I saw like it was compounding daily, and I was like, let me try this for a short time and see if my hunch is actually the truth. And as I did that, I saw like, oh wow, there are a lot of people who want this kind of support, need this kind of support, and are looking for it. So it just kind of transitioned in a nice but timely kind of way. So
Nice. And what successes have your students had along the way that you'd like to share that you think are quite powerful stories?
yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of nice when you get a text message from a student saying like, I'm using your study skills and your plans, and like I was getting, you know like in the low 70s on my grades, and now I'm getting like my grades are improving. It's great when you see your students graduating from university, or like getting a job, or getting back into school. There's a lot of like successes, and like I think that's a great thing actually that you're bringing up, because I think my students often lack seeing successes, and we need to kind of give them the building blocks to like incrementally and gradually build back up their skills, their self-esteem, and their just overall outlook of themselves, because for so long a lot of times they've been struggling, and we need to kind of allow them to see successes so that they can continue to build on that. um, I,
Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
I would also say that with this type of work, these big successes don't come as regularly as the small ones. So celebrating the baby steps, I think, are really important along the way, because this is such a long process. It's not an overnight fix. It's not something that's gonna just, you know, magically. Sometimes you do see those amazing feats that students kind of um, you know achieve, but it's not the everyday part of the job. So celebrating the small victories, I think, are really important.
Yeah, I think as well, external praise is powerful. And you mentioned before, like you don't try to hold students accountable through shame or trying to guilt them into their work or what they're expected to do. And I think that's obviously key. As anyone that's an educator, it's very much key to not use shame and guilt to try to bribe students to get to do their work because ultimately it doesn't work. It might have short term effects, but in the long run, it's also an issue as well, isn't it?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I would say, you know, the shame and the guilt is just it's the wrong, just obviously the wrong approach, right? And um, a lot of my students already feel that already, so they sometimes they expect me to kind of almost, if they didn't do what they say, what I asked them to do, like, or what they said they were going to do, they almost feel that on their own. And I'm trying to shift their thinking and allow them to think like, no, this is not about this. You have ADHD or you have executive function delays. This is part of what you have to struggle with. It's not something you necessarily have to feel bad about. I mean, it is a struggle. It is something that like you're going to have to battle, but you can develop these skills and overcome this. And knowing that it's ADHD, then like it kind of helps sometimes with not feeling so bad about yourself, even though it can be,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. I think understanding just the way your brain works, because it's literally the way your brain is wired. You can
exactly.
try to build mechanisms to get through daily life and be able to complete work and your studies, but it's ultimately the way your brain's wired. So it's having that awareness, I think, is quite powerful. And you're creating a space that is welcoming, it's free from shame, and it sounds like you're giving the students the tools they need to be able to actually have those mini successes and understand that they are capable of doing certain things that they struggle with. You mentioned as well that you work with other students that have other challenges. What other challenges do your other students have, and how do you work with them to overcome them? Is it in a similar way you work with neurodivergent learners, or is it a bit different for every student?
Yeah, I would say, the core skill we're working on for most of my students, whether they have ADHD, whether they're somewhere else on the spectrum, whether they have slow processing or just are struggling academically and need some skills and support that they never learned. So I would say all of that's kind of the spectrum of the students in which I kind of help. But the core skills are the executive functioning skills, which I work on. So these are all the peripheral things. I tell my parents a lot of times, like, these are skills that are life skills. Like, yeah, they're going to help you in school. And like a lot of time we're using school as the platform because school is their job and school is how they're going to get to the next level, and they have to do well at this level. But the skills that I'm teaching are really life skills, and they're really going to help them throughout their career, relationships, um, finding work, all these other things that you're going to have, just managing your life in general, paying bills, keeping your home and your room and your life in order. So all these things are crucial to. And I tell parents also, like, it's really important to work on it as when the students are younger, because the longer they wait, they're going to develop more bad habits, potentially coping mechanisms, ways to deal with it on their own that aren't necessarily going to help them in the long run. And so they need to. What I do, I think, is shine a light, shed awareness, like a floodlight on. Okay, here's sometimes our sessions turn into like conversations. Here's where I see that you are looking. You might be able to improve, and then how do we slowly build on those skills?
Mm. I feel like a lot of what you mentioned as well, it would be beneficial for all students, learning how to manage a budget, things that we don't get taught in school, um, keeping a house tidy and clean, um, yeah, taking care of other people,
Right.
being accountable for your actions, your behavior, all of that. And
Mhm.
it doesn't tend to get taught in school, right?
That's so right. That's so true because none of I what. So you asked me before about my transition into this type of work, but at the end of my time in the classroom, I was doing so much executive function direct teaching because I was saw that there was such a lack of it. I mean, you might see sometimes there's a study skills class in a school, or you might sometimes see like a teacher who sees the need for like their students to be organized, teach it. But you're right. These are generally for the large part not taught in schools, and and that's where I think the biggest need is. You're right, and I don't think it's just students with who are neurodivergent who need this help. I think other kids kind of seem to get it or not during like some point along the way, middle school, high school, where things start to get more difficult. Some kids just grasp it and figure it out and learn their own ways to organize and manage their time and all these EF skills. But there are just some who don't pick it up, and it needs to be explicitly taught to them.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. I guess also secondary school is the time that it is going to be the biggest struggle to develop those skills, because as somebody who's got ADHD, I understand we have issues with being on time, remembering equipment, remembering the things that you need when you walk out the door. Scheduling is a struggle. I remember I had a student that had ADHD, and I would print out his little schedule. Oh, sorry, and it would be all color coordinated, and he'd have a little laminate card in his pocket so he can have a look at any time. And he lost this schedule frequently, but it was a tool that did help him when he had it in his pocket.
Right.
So yeah, I think secondary school is that where you see most of the struggle with the students that you work with.
Yeah, I would say so. That's where it starts. You know, it really depends. There's like sometimes you'll have some exceptionally bright students who can mask it and kind of get through uh, based on their intelligence. And a lot of times, what I notice in secondary school is that the teachers often allow or late or missing assignments. And I think it's not a great message to send to students because they're always like, hey, and my students often get reminders like, hey, you gotta hand this in. But in real life, no one's going to remind you of that. When you get to college, no one's going to remind you, hey, you need to hand in these assignments. You need to get this paper in. So in some ways, it's the intention is good, right? But the outcome, I think, is not is the opposite effect. It's allowing for like I think I call it I call them controlled failures. I think it's important to like with my students with ADHD, they need to experience a little bit of pain, and they need to experience maybe it more than the regular person. But we don't want to take our hands off and let them fail catastrophically. We want them to kind of like controlled failure. Hey, this is what's happening. Here's the path. If you continue to do this, this might happen. We have to bring awareness to the situation, experience some sort of pain enough, but not so much where it's going to devastate them and throw them off track, but enough to kind of redirect and say, hey, I need to build some skills around this. And if I don't do it now, it's going to be more painful later on down the road.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you find that intrinsic motivation plays a factor in getting students to feel um, not just more motivated, but to be more accountable for the things that they need to do?
I do. I think intrinsic motivation is really important in this process um, because you want to do the things that you enjoy and you love, and often my students with ADHD have really big passions and are like really, like you said before, they really get into something and they like almost hyperfixate or obsess about it. And I think if you can tie those kind of things in somehow and make it part of the motivation to do well in other areas, like then it works sometimes. I
Mm.
think it doesn't always work, but it is a big motivating factor. But at the same time, it comes down to also like parenting skills too. Like, can you tie this in a way? So a lot of another aspect of what I do is help parents kind of navigate that and say like, okay, you can have access to your video games, you can have access to this stuff, but you have to almost unlock it. You have to like complete other tasks, and like we need to be a little bit firm in these in this kind of uh, plan or setup, because when we don't have that kind of structure, then our students don't learn the lesson, and they continue the
Yeah.
behaviors. So that has to be a part of it, I believe, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an element of not being able to self-regulate, and um instant gratification is the biggest killer of productivity. I find, always wanting to be instantly gratified, Minecraft, Roblox, all of these,
For
types of
sure.
games that they give you that kind of instant gratification when you play them. My daughter is 8 and she is obsessed with Roblox, and it
Hmm.
has to be a case where I do have to help her to regulate, because she's 8. She can't
Right.
regulate it on her own. If it was up to her, she'd just be playing it all the time, and
Yep.
she's not going to go outside and listen to the birds and get some fresh air and get physical and be healthy. So
Mhm.
yeah, helping them to regulate, I think, is obviously quite key.
And my daughter is 10, and she's also obsessed with Roblox.
Do you have just the one child, or have you
I
got
do.
more?
I do.
You
Just
do?
one daughter. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you help her then, with obviously the tools you've got? How do you help her to regulate it?
She's pretty good at self-regulating, but at the same time, I have to kind of give her the hints and like lay down some structure. You're right. If I let her go all day, she'd just stay on the games. So I think reminders, giving like offering other options, like enti- making enticing the situation. Like I don't really have to work too hard with her, fortunately, so to kind of convince her to do something else. So I think just having balance and having other interests, and
Mm.
like I think what's really important is exploring other interests and uh, incentivizing other interests as well.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. We did that with my daughter recently, where she really wanted to learn dance. So I was like, okay, on a Saturday morning, she could go to this dance and drama class, and it's like 4.5 hours this class. And that was something that has got her, away from the tablet, and she's doing something else. She's pursuing a different interest. So yeah, definitely, that's a good technique, I think.
Mhm.
Um, if you would, if there's anything you'd want people to understand about, if say it's a parent that has a child that is really struggling with executive function, what would you give them as a recommendation of how they can support that child?
Yeah, I would say learn as much as you can about executive function, and and try to get as much information to try to start supporting them at home that you can. It's interesting because parents always say to me, "I I just need someone else to step in," because either the relationship is frayed or they have tried to explore these ideas and have not been able to follow through. So I think the most important part is getting, one knowledge, like getting the knowledge and understanding how someone with ADHD struggles with executive function, and then if they need to, getting some sort of outside support. If not always, it's not always necessary to hire a coach or to get somebody else. Like you can get your school, if you have really good supports at your school, like you can get support there as well. But also the parents can do a lot. There's a lot of training they can get. There's a lot of reading they can do, and there's a lot of like supports they can put in place. It's just that some parents feel like they want the relationship with their child to be more of like the cheerleader instead of the enforcer. They want to be
Mm.
the encourager instead of the person who's saying do this, do that. You got to do this. So it's understandable in many ways, because as a parent myself, you're a parent as well. We want to have a good relationship with our kids, and we don't want to be constantly like enforcing things. But at the same time, the tough love is what's going to make the relationship stronger in the end, and kind of establishing these set routines and strategies around their lives.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a great point there, because I think sometimes as parents we want to take on everything, and I think it's quite empowering to fully accept that you actually can't do everything for your child sometimes. You might not be the best person to be trying to teach your child how to build a schedule and set goals and stick to deadlines. You might not be the best person for that.
Right.
So yeah, sometimes it is more empowering to ask for help and to seek help elsewhere. In the UK now, there's a lack of diagnosing students, young people, adults that have ADHD, because there's been a popularity in the service. And in the UK, obviously, we have the NHS, so it's dependent on government funds, and there's a limit on the services that can actually be used. So I think a lot of parents now that genuinely see the signs of ADHD in their child, they're really struggling to support them. And sometimes teachers can put in provisions without like we call it an EHC plan in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
without one of those plans in place. But it can be hard, like you've mentioned before. You would take students out of the classroom, so there's an element of exclusion from the environment they're actually learning in. Um, so yeah, do you have any top tips that you would share with parents on, like, maybe like 3 things they could do to support their child at home if they really do believe that they have ADHD? Like, how can they help them to stick to deadlines and do these things that they tend to struggle with?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is to get into the habit of writing things down and keeping a plan. I think that's such a useful thing that is often, it's a simple thing. Like I also tell parents, I said the skills that I'm teaching the students are not these groundbreaking, like outside the box skills. They're actually really like bringing structure. I would say that would be the second thing, is bringing structure into the day. People with ADHD often do not do well with unstructured time
Mm.
and having an open schedule. So planning, scheduling, and I would say the last thing would be to maybe have support and someone around you who you could talk to kind of keep keeps steady with your schedule, keep on the schedule, or just kind of you know if you feel like you can, consistency would be the last one, is the point that I'm trying to make here. So staying you we can all start a new plan and like stick with it for a few days, but if it's not consistent, I think that's the final glue that's going to keep these skills together.
Yeah, consistency is the hardest. Consistency is the biggest struggle of my life. Um, as an adult and someone who's kind of self-taught myself different coping mechanisms to handle the challenges that come with ADHD, it has been more of a case of um, accepting that I can't be consistent all the time, which is what consistency is, but
Mm-hmm.
more of a case of um like I tend to go back to my goals. So like, for example, if I want to lose weight, like I have to go back and sit down, like you said, writing things down and readdress what it is that the reason is that I want to actually achieve that goal. So I kind of do that a lot, like revisiting those goals and my intrinsic motivation in things. And then I found over the years as well that my hyperfixations, which tend to be a distraction from, say work, or when I was studying, it was a distraction from studying. For example, like teaching myself how to code and build websites and do all of these things. I've noticed over the years that there is a pattern and that I do tend to go back to the same hobbies. So I allow myself to be able to go back to those things, but like setting timers is helpful, making sure
Mm-hmm.
that I
Right.
have a cutoff point. And then, yeah, outside accountability. So if I'm struggling with my housework, which is a constant struggle for me, it really helps if somebody says that they're coming over, because then I can do the housework within 20 minutes, it'll be done. But if it was
Right.
left up to me, like you said, leaving too much time, then yeah, it's a struggle just to do the basic tasks.
I think it's a great point. I think, when we have, I think I love what you said, allowing yourself to come back to things, knowing, if you know that that's who you are. Like for myself too, like I know I have interests. I know, like, I tend to let them go and I come back around to them again at some point. Like, I being okay with that and understanding that that's how you work, I think is fine too. I also like to try to limit myself into how many interests I have as well. Like, oh, is three things to be working on right now? That's probably a good number, but sometimes it gets to be a little out of control.
Yeah. Somebody said something recently to me actually, which was quite powerful. And I'm probably not going to say it right, but she said she was a runner, and she said she developed this consistency with running like every day. It's something that she does now, but it took her a while to build up that level of consistency. And she says she doesn't question the decision now. Like, she doesn't allow herself to question it. So she'll, if she has that plan that she's going to run every day at, say, 8 o'clock in the morning, she can't question it. She just has to put her running shoes on, her running clothes, and she has to just go and do it. And I think that's quite useful for me personally, to not question it, just do it, do the thing that
Mhm.
you set out to do, and then afterwards you obviously feel great about doing that. But it can be a struggle.
Yeah, and like sometimes we want to do things. Like sometimes, even for me, like I will like do something, and I'll do it for quite a while, and then all of a sudden stop out of nowhere. Like I'm not questioning it. I'm going to the gym, or I'm exercising, and I'm good for like a couple months, and then it disappears. I'm like, I've lost all my motivation, so I have to like know
Mm.
that that's part of me, let that slide for a little while, come back to it when I can again, because it's part of the flow, and I can't explain why that happens. I wish it didn't, but it does sometimes to a lot of my students as well. So being, maybe finding a new way to approach it the next time is really important, so it sticks longer, and I think that's great, not questioning it as well.
Yeah, and also not complicating things. I think the ADHD brain does complicate things.
Mhm.
So like if I'm like, I want to understand everything from like
Yeah.
I want to read like the peer reviewed papers on things. If I'm trying to lose weight, I want to learn about the science behind it. And you can get really overwhelmed because there's so many different conflicting ideas, and then that overcomplicates it, and that's just I'm bound to fail if that's the route I'm going to go down. So I think sometimes just trying to make it simple. It doesn't matter what exercise you do. If we're talking about exercise, it can be anything. It could be going for a walk, it can be going for a run, it can be dancing, it can be cleaning. Find a way to kind of make it simple so that you're doing the thing that you need to be doing, but it's less of a challenge, because it's just a constant challenge when you have ADHD to try and get yourself to do those basic things.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with? Is there anything that you'd like to mention that you've not already mentioned yet?
No, just the fact that, like, I think a lot of people don't know what executive function coaching is, and I hope I was able to kind of shed some light on it. But it does, there's so much to be had from this type of support for somebody. I mean, I know just for myself, like, I wish I had somebody who I could, you know, who would show me some better ways to go about studying and planning and organizing. And if I had that, I think I would make my life a whole lot easier. So I encourage people to look, if they're really struggling with ADHD, or their son or daughter is, and they're looking for this kind of support, to look out there and see if somebody can help you, and someone can put you in the in the right direction. I think the trust and the relationship is really important as well. So it's got to be the right fit, and it's got to be the right person that works for you. So finding that right person, if once you do, can be a very rewarding experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining. If anybody would like to learn more about Chris and his coaching, I will put all of the relevant links in the Spotify description. So go ahead and check them out. And once again, thank you so much, Chris, for being a part of this conversation and sharing your insight on everything related to EF coaching and the neurodivergent struggle.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a really fun time and really nice talking to you.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.